go. Oh, that's quite loud, sorry. Hi, everyone. We are a full house today, so please can everyone make sure they sit next to one another, move your bags. Just to make people aware as well, we've got 2 spaces for the plenaries. We've got this room and we've got the room behind where we are streaming all our plenary talks. So if you do prefer a space that has got less people in it, then there's that space as well. But you're all in this room now, so if you can all squeeze up together, that would be great. And we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes.
Welcome to P&J Live. Can I please have your attention for the following safety announcement? In the event of an emergency, there will be both audible and visual alarms. You will be directed to leave the venue by a pre-recorded message. Upon hearing any evacuation message, you must leave the building immediately, following the signs to your nearest exit before proceeding to the designated assembly point. Thank you for your attention.
Right, good morning, everyone. Yes, very good morning. Dear colleagues, friends, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the PCST 2025 Aberdeen Conference. It is my great honor and pleasure to announce the opening of the PCST conference. My name is Suk-kyung Jo, and I am the president of the PCST Global Network. On behalf of the PCST Global Network, I warmly welcome all of you. Once again, I express my great gratitude to the City of Aberdeen and the University of Aberdeen, one of the prestigious and ancient universities. Also, I extend my deepest gratitude to local organizing committee and the program subcommittee of the PCST network. In special, I would like to express my special thanks to Dr. Heather Doran and Professor Richard Holliman and Nikki from University of Aberdeen, who made great efforts and put lots of energy for make this conference possible. Right, at last, we are here in Aberdeen with a big smile, right? Originally, this conference was planned before the Rotterdam Conference 2023, but it was postponed because of the COVID pandemic. As we know well, the COVID pandemic changed our lives in many different aspects. One of its unexpected outcomes is the urgent need for accurate, effective, and sustainable science communication. Ironically, the theme of this conference, tradition, tensions, and transformation of the science communication, is rather timely, I think. Under these three T's, we have the well-known and marvelous keynote speakers from different continents. I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce the name well, but anyway, Savita Albazili from Brazil, and Akaziez from Pakistan and UK, am I correct? Right. Mamoret Mojia from South Africa, and Lazegru Tantong from UNESCO, and Sophie Duncan and Paul Manner from UK. They will give us wonderful speech and insightful thoughts. The PCST network has developed greatly since it begins in 1989 in Poitiers, France. I still remember the drum banging performance of the African dancers at the opening session at Cape Town in 2002. Also, I had a good memory to hosting the PCST 9 conference in 2006 in Seoul, Korea. It was 23 years ago. I met my old friends there, Tos, Bernard, Jenny, Buki, Marina, yes, and Hans Peters. And here I met new friends. Since then, our network moved from Europe to Africa, Africa to Asia, Asia to South America, South America to Europe again, and it will meet in Asia in 2 years later. In this Aberdeen conference, we will celebrate the first PCST Award. I do not know who will be the winner of the first PCST Award, but whoever is the winner, I believe he or she must have a great contribution to the development of PCST movement. Also, he or she give us lots of encouragement and support for the future. I believe this is another historical step to moving forward. For congratulations, the GIST AIX School in South Korea kindly sponsor the fund for the award. Let's move forward together. I hope during the 3 days, all of you enjoy people's ideas, environments, and food. Once again, I warmly welcome all of you. Let's make a wonderful memory to share for the future. Thank you very much. Tsukyangjo.
Hi everyone and welcome. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to PCST 2025 here in Aberdeen. It's amazing to see so many of you here, so some colleagues, collaborators and new faces as well as we come together to explore, reflect and challenge our ideas about science communication. I'm Heather Doran, I'm the programme chair for the PCST conference this year. And for those of you who are visiting Aberdeen for the first time, welcome to, well, we call it granite, silver, some might call it grey city, I don't like using that term. It's looking lovely in the sunshine. And it's a place with deep roots in science and industry and community, and it's been shaped over the years through tradition and transformation. So we're going to be speaking a lot more about that over the next few days. Aberdeen's a city for me that holds personal significance. I did my PhD here, and I hope during your time you'll experience not only its kind of landscapes as well, but also the warmth and creativity. So this year's conference theme, using science communication to effect positive change, exploring transitions, traditions, and tensions, reflects the complexity of our field. Science communication exists at an important intersection where knowledge meets society and facts may meet values, and where long-held practices meet new ideas. The aims of the PCST network are always to bring science communication practitioners and science communication researchers together, and there are people from all parts of the globe represented at this conference. It's the flagship event and main event for the PCST community, although we do connect in between conferences through webinars and seminars as well. there's no one single definition that we hold of science communication, and I think that's really important and something to be celebrated. The diversity of perspectives, background, and approaches is what makes PCST such a rich and dynamic community. So whatever you consider yourself as, whether it's a researcher, a writer, journalist, practitioner, policymaker, artist, activist, someone who works maybe in museums and science centres, or a mix of all of those, which I think many people are, your contributions are vital to kind of creating our community. Most of you are here to share your perspectives in the work that you do, but I'm going to ask you to take on a bigger task over the next 3 days, which is to pause. We don't often get time to pause and to listen to what everybody else is saying and what they are doing. I think that's really important. And I encourage you to kind of think about three or four even questions that we've got. How do we navigate the tensions that we've got with openness rather than with defensiveness? What do we carry forward and what must we kind of leave behind? Whose voices are amplified and whose are missing? And what did you learn from others over those 3 days? A conference of this scale does not come together on its own, and as mentioned, this one has been a longer journey than usual, as many of you know. It started planning back in 2015 here in Aberdeen with myself and Ken Skeldon. I don't know where Ken is, I can't see him. There he is, over there. And Nikki Pierce as well, who's many of you will have interacted with. I don't know if Nikki's still in the room or if she's snuck downstairs. Many of you will have spoken to Nikki as well over the planning for the conference as we planned our bid to host. But as you know, we had to take a pause in 2020, and there's a large number of people who've been part of this journey. So I want to thank the local organising committee, most of which are based here in Aberdeen, for their dedication and support to making the conference. The programme committee, who worked on creating such a thoughtful and wide-ranging programme, and our sponsors and partners who have helped make this possible. I'm going to give a special thanks to Nikki, who's been the driving force between the connection between PCST and the city, and also to Brian Trench and Jenny Metcalf, who in 2019, 2020 and 2021, I think we were speaking on a weekly basis virtually about what we would do and how we would manage the situation that we were in. And finally, a thanks to Professor Richard Holloman, who led the bursary scheme for everyone this year. And thank you to everyone who contributed to the Pay It Forward. That was a new thing for PCST. Thank you for your generosity. And we've been able to award over 35 bursaries, I think it's nearly 40 actually, bursaries through the programme this year. So yeah, that was good. Science communication thrives when it's inclusive, and this effort ensures that more voices, perspectives, and lived experiences are represented within our discussions. So throughout the coming days, we'll have the opportunity to engage with lots of different sessions, so please embrace those, make the most of the opportunities, and as well as always with PCST, although the presentations are important, the quieter conversations that happen over coffee, during walks, or where the ideas are shared and collaborations are sparked and those lasting connections are made. So finally, I just want to acknowledge that we're all bringing different perspectives and experiences to this space, and my hope is that this conference not only provides new insights, but allows to question our own assumptions and to listen really deeply and to consider those tensions that I think, if navigated openly, can lead to growth. Finally, as well, I want to recognise, I know many of your journeys to attend the conference aren't easy ones, they're not straightforward. Some people have travelled a long way, people have made their own personal contributions to be able to be here, and I want to recognise that. So thank you, and it just underlines this commitment and significance that people feel about science communication. So thank you all, enjoy the conference, and I hope you enjoy Aberdeen. So indulge me a minute, because I'm doing a slightly awkward thing, because I'm also introducing our keynote speakers. So I'm going to stay here for a minute. So this is our first keynote session. You'll have seen on the screen cycling that there's a QR code on there. We are going to take all questions for our plenaries electronically. This allows us to kind of streamline the discussion a little bit. So please take a scan of that, and then you can ask your questions there. Or as indicated by our first speakers, maybe share some of your thoughts and perspectives as well. So I'm really delighted for the opening for the conference. We've got two leading voices in the field of public engagement with research, Sophie Duncan and Paul Manners, who are co-directors of the National Co-ordinating Centre for Public Engagement in the UK. Sophie and Paul have shaped national policy and practice around engagement, and also they've worked really tirelessly to embed a culture of meaningful, inclusive and reflective public engagement across the UK's research landscape. They've worked over the past, is it 15 years? Yeah, it is. Yeah, okay, I didn't want to mention. To kind of shift how universities and research institutions think about their role in society. There are many things that are amazing that have been created, many things that I use daily in my practice, including the EDGE tool, I'm going to give a shout to that, which is a really valuable resource to bring things together, and the Manifesto for Public Engagement, which has been signed by over 90 UK institutions. They've got really interesting backgrounds themselves, they bring their own knowledge, their own thoughts to the practice, and they look at things both from a strategic point of view and also from a really personal level, and how they bring things together. They've supported thousands of researchers and professional staff to build their confidence and capability engagement. And they've also really championed the idea that public engagement is not a nice to have, but a must have for research that aims to be socially responsible and impactful. As I mentioned, they take this deeply human approach, and the ethos of listening is one that the NCCPE have championed since the start. My journey is connected to their journey as well, so I am very excited to introduce them as our keynote speakers today, and we're going to explore some of the lessons that they have learned along the way. So thank you very much, and if you could put your hands together for Sophie and Paul.
Wow, what an introduction to live up to. I hope you're not going to be disappointed after that. It's a privilege to come and speak to the PCST conference. Welcome to the UK. It's really good to see you here, and this is a day that has been planned for a very long time. And I hope you're going to really have an opportunity to get to know one another, to listen to one another, and be curious about each other's practices. When we were asked to speak today, we were invited to share a case study, and it's a case study from the UK, and it's going to be looking into the past, considering the present, and then looking into the future. And we're going to take you on a ride with us from that past, when we first started the NCCPE, all the way through to the futures that we now hope for. And that story is full of challenge and change, but it's also full of hope and the amazing companions who've joined us on the journey. I'm just going to ask, if you've been part of this journey with us, do you want to give a wave? There's quite a few of us in the room, and I hope that this keynote will also be exciting for you, because you've been part of something really special that has been affecting change in how universities and research organisations in the UK embed a culture of public engagement and science communication. So this is us. This is our website. We were set up in 2008, and we had one simple aim: to change how every university and research organisation in the UK supported, incentivised, rewarded, recognised, embedded public engagement into their core mission. And on our website, you'll find lots of the resources that we've developed, that we've learnt, alongside many of the colleagues in the room and internationally, about what change looks like. And the other thing we're going to reflect on in our story is the three conference themes: the traditions that have informed all of our histories and all of the ways that we work together, the traditions that have informed how science communication is done. We're going to be looking at transitions. We're going to be talking about some of the critical things that lead us to change, that lead us to have those transitions. And we're also going to talk about some of the tensions that remain, tensions that throughout this conference we'll probably be talking about together. But to get us started, I'm going to hand over to Paul for the beginning of the story.
Thank you, Sophie, and it is absolutely lovely to be here and slightly intimidating. But yeah, our story, I think, is a story of change, as Sophie has said, and we're going to tell a very simplified version of that story, and I'm going to take you back to the mid-2000s, and I'm sure in every context there were really profound conversations happening around science at that time. This is a very simple shorthand to just remind us of that breakdown of trust between science and society that became so, I guess, so mobilizing, I think, for many of us at that time, and which led to many of the changes that are still working their way through the system. A reminder, I think, that what was realized at this time was that the way we were doing science and the relationships we were building around science and research were not working, and they were creating really significant challenges. Challenges for those of us who worked in science communication. We talked about public understanding of science, perhaps, running up to this point, and that was a dominant paradigm. But at that point, I think people were really realizing that that implicit deficit model, that if we just give people the facts, they will join us on the journey, just doesn't work. You need to listen, and it was lovely to hear Heather setting that out so clearly. So the notion of public engagement was born, and it drew together a kind of hybrid collection of people who were passionate about connecting people with learning, with knowledge, with research. The other thing that became crystal clear at that time was that the culture of science itself was a really major problem in terms of this relationship with society. There was a very influential report in 2006 from the Royal Society which identified the factors that affect science communication. And it identified, perhaps in the UK, perhaps for the first time so comprehensively, that the issue sat with the professional culture of science. And it identified that pressure to publish, that competitive nature, that sense that what is recognized and rewarded is academic output at all costs, was creating this inward-looking and dysfunctional system. And that needed to change too. And that persuaded a group of funders to come together, including the Higher Education Funding Councils, the Wellcome Trust, and the Research Councils in the UK, to set up an initiative called the Beacons for Public Engagement, 6 university partnerships, and a coordinating centre based in Bristol. And this was one of those 6 beacons for public engagement. Remember, this was 2008. I mean, this was way ahead of its time. That notion of connecting people, place, and knowledge, I think, is only just beginning to really be understood as to how we do it. But this was a project that brought the 3 universities in the city of Manchester together with a range of cultural, community, and civic partners to kind of try to build a sense of jointly working together and bringing research and the assets of the university into a really productive relationship with people across the city. Wasn't it exciting? You know, Sophie and I saw this proposition, and both of us came from other worlds, as Heather so kindly pointed out. Sophie started, she moved from science and research. I wonder if you could go back to the previous slide, please. It seems to be on a timer. Thank you. Sophie came from a career at the Science Museum as a trainee, then joined Science Year, a national campaign to engage people in science. She then moved to the BBC and ran big national learning campaigns. I started as a school teacher, teaching English in London, and then moved to the Open University as a television producer with the BBC. I think both of us had an absolute passion for engagement, for learning, for the kind of public good that education, whether that's schools, universities, or informal learning, should provide, and also a real curiosity about what fantastic, interesting, creative practice can look like, whether that's in the university sector, but probably not in the university sector at that time, probably outside, a culture of engagement. And so these 2 bright fresh-faced young idealists took on the role of setting up this centre. And boy, did we have a bit of a kind of bump as the reality, actually, of what we'd been asked to do began to sink in. Of course, there were wonderful people, and many of them are in this room, who were trying to do this work in universities in multiple traditions and ways of thinking and working, and that was fantastic. But the sheer kind of brutal reality of how universities are organised and their cultures proved to us, I think, to be quite an initial kind of, yeah, okay, we need to think a little bit more seriously about how on earth we're going to affect the change. So what we wanted to do before we begin to tell more of that story is to just invite you to reflect a little on who you are. You know, what motivates you to do this work? And the other really significant question is, around you, what culture is there, and to what extent does that culture provide you with the support to be and to do the work that you really care about? And it's a chance to introduce yourself to people perhaps you haven't met before. But two simple questions, you know, what traditions and cultures shape who you are and what you do? It's a chance to get to know each other. And if you wanted to share anything through that online platform that Heather told you about, then do feel free to add it. We're not going to do a Q&A. We just want a bit of a conversation in the room. So you've got 5 minutes, really, to just get to know each other, and 4 minutes to get to know each other. Time is tight. Over to you.
pull you back. I'm going to pull you back. If you need the QR code, now is the time to grab it, because I'm just about to move on in my slides. It's so great when a conference gets talking, and that's what it's about, talking and listening to one another. And Paul was right. We'd completely underestimated the challenge. I remember having this lovely first day at the NCCPE, and I was presented with a plan that had secured the money for the centre. I'd been newly recruited, super excited, and I looked at this plan and it said, at the end of 4 years, every single university will be working differently. And I remember thinking, you know, really? And then I went and met some universities, and then I realised no chance. There was absolutely no chance. And I realised this was going to require much more of us than a 4-year project, and it was going to require allies. And we went out and we listened. We listened to lots of people. We uncovered the most amazing engagement practices. We found amazing outreach that was inspiring and informing children, thinking about being curious, knowledge builders and users in the future. We found really amazing people invested in developing relationships collaboratively with organizations outside of the university and affecting deep societal change. We found people who were really passionate but very lonely, people who felt they existed in a culture that wasn't made for them, and who were really looking for allies. So we found our tribe, and many of those people today are in the room, and I'm sure if we've not met you yet, maybe you're part of that tribe too. People who are really championing a different way to build knowledge, a different way to share knowledge. So we created a theory of change. Wave at me if you like theories of change. I know they're kind of, some of you, I've got some friends in the audience, brilliant. And that theory of change said we need to do 3 things. We need to develop a policy landscape that funds, incentivizes, and recognizes engagement as a key aspect of work, because we all know that universities are hugely, hugely influenced by where the funding's coming from. So we needed to change that. We needed to work with universities to truly get under the skin of how do universities work, and what does it mean to embrace an engaged way of working into the heart of your identity as an institution. And what does that look like in how your processes work and in what you recognize and reward in your promotions criteria, for example? And then the third thing we needed to do was that we needed to build capability and capacity across the university sector, drawing on those who are already doing excellent work and building more agency and support for the many others who could get involved. And at this time, I think we really valued the fact that universities began to invest in a group of people that we tend to refer as public engagement professionals, people whose identity is to support the engagement within an institution, to be that broker between what's happening within the university and what's happening outside of the university, being the institutional memory, being the value system, being the ones who are ethical and thoughtful to enable this change, being the capability builders. And this amazing group of people were coming into being across the sector, and they were hugely influential in the change, the culture change we were looking for. So a very big change happened, and Stephen Hill, who's here, I don't know where you are, can you wave at me? Yay, you're there, brilliant. Stephen Hill, he comes from Research England, from UKRI. Very worth grabbing a conversation with him if you have time. But there was this new thing called the Research Excellence Framework. And a Research Excellence Framework is a mechanism by which billions of pounds of funding is distributed to universities across the UK for their research. And it used to be that that was only done on the basis of retrospective assessment of the excellence of the research via the research outputs. But this time, the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, the new way of distributing this money, also recognised the impact of the research. So that's meant that universities had to evidence how the research that they were saying was excellent was impactful research. And they could evidence that through case studies, And they also had to evidence the environment in which they were supporting that impact. And this was a game changer, and it was hard fought. There are a lot of people in the UK who didn't want it to happen, a lot of academics who really felt this was undermining what they were doing as academics. Yet it was pushed through, and it has been a game changer. And it's created an environment, Bud, you're disagreeing with me. It's created an environment where people can think about their research in relationship to society and really understand what's the research for in the first place and how do you engage thoughtfully with it. And the Research Excellence Framework, it happens every 7 years. So there have been 2 rounds of it so far, and each time it gets better. It gets better and better at articulating what is the purpose of research and how do we value it. The second thing we did, and Heather name-checked it earlier, was the EDGE tool. The EDGE tool is basically a piece of paper that cost us about 9.1 million, we joke. All of that investment, all of those 4 years of really understanding how universities work, how do you change them? How do you change them? And the EDGE tool summarizes this into a set of categories that you need to think about if you're trying to affect change. And broadly speaking, they link to purpose, process, and people. So purpose, how is it embedded into your mission? How do you communicate about it externally and internally? And how do leaders lead this agenda across every level of the organization? The processes to support it. How do you learn? Where's the learning? You know, we were running events where people were meeting people from their same university who they'd never met before, who were champions of engagement. You know, so how do you share learning? What recognition do you give people? How do you reward and recognize this work? Do you give it any time? Isn't that the critical problem? It needs time. Thoughtful, really engaged, responsible, ethical engagement requires time. And what about the support infrastructures that you have there? How are you supporting this happening? And then last but not least, people. How are you involving people in this work? How are you working with people to inform what you're doing and how you're doing it? And that includes your staff, also includes your students, your research students, but also your undergraduate students. And critically, it involves publics. And what was exciting was that universities started to work on this agenda. They started to judge themselves against the EDGE tool. They began to look at how could we improve these various things. And things seemed to be going well. But we already talked about one set of shocks. Another set of shocks to the system were coming.
Thank you. So yes, we're skipping forward now, perhaps 10 years from when we started, 2008, to 2018-ish. And the good ship, higher education, it was changing. I think things like the REF had socialized this idea of engagement and impact being part of what we do and why it matters, and it was being assessed in ways that were shifting things. And there were several subsequent investments from our funders into new programs of culture change. There was one here at the University of Aberdeen where we met some of the people here today. But I think it would be fair to say that still, 10 years on from the beacons, universities were still perhaps quite siloed in how they worked, and I love the containers on this tanker powering forward. But, you know, what happened next? This is a very simplistic way of reminding you, and probably causing you some distress, frankly, to just remember some of the pain that we've lived through and some of the disruption. But certainly this really affected how people who worked within the university sector understood their responsibilities and their relationship to the world outside. And clearly the pandemic massively impacted on all of us and created all kinds of transformations in our work. In the UK, we had Brexit, which you may well have heard about from outside the UK, but what Brexit did was fundamentally pull the rug out from underneath many of us who work in universities, who kind of assumed that our worldview and our mindset was a kind of inevitable progress into the future of collaboration, connection, etc. And the arguments for Brexit, many people who worked in universities, many vice-chancellors wrote, to basically distance themselves from it. But it was something that the British people wanted in the referendum, and it kind of really, I think, created a sense that we cannot take for granted that our way of being and our way of knowing and our way of seeing the world is the only way. And so I think that, again, is hard to navigate, isn't it? It's really hard to make sense of. I think at the same time, the sense of the climate emergency becoming more and more compelling as a reason for change. And in the US, the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement that then moved across brought issues of inclusion and issues of equity and of our kind of interdependence very much to the foreground. And at the same time, a really strong pull towards more populist mindsets. And at the moment, those of you who work within the US, I can only feel for what that must be like at the moment, but equally a sense that that is not the right direction. So all of this swirling around us and around our practice within universities, I think, has created a really profound sense of what next? How on earth are we going to move to the next part of our story? I think we've told a story that gets us to the recent present that was a relatively positive, progressive journey. But when we look into the future, as we've been asked to do at this conference, I think we need to kind of step up and to think differently and to imagine differently, actually, because the stakes are now so much higher and the risks are so much greater for the work that we care about. So we've decided to do something to kind of help us get through into that future.
So we have and are in the middle of a big project across the UK called Engaged Futures. And this is trying to look at where we are now, what's broken in the current system, what's not working, what's no longer fit for purpose, and imagine different futures. And perhaps most importantly, not just imagining those futures, but developing allyship and alignment to enable us to get to those futures. And when I look back, sometimes when I lose hope, I look back to 2008. And in 2008, I couldn't imagine a research centre like the Leverhulme Research Centre for Forensic Science that Heather works at. I couldn't imagine a centre that took at its key proposition engagement with all the stakeholders who are influenced and informed by forensic science and enables that in a much more targeted and effective way. I just couldn't imagine it, and yet there it is, as a kind of I couldn't imagine that universities would be assessing themselves against the EDGE tool and working towards being embedded across every level. And yet, we have gold award holders now, platinum award holders of the watermark that we run as an assessment tool for universities. And so there are things in the future I can't imagine, but it gives me hope when I look back to the past that these things can be possible. So how does Three Horizons work? You look at Horizon 1, that's our current horizon. It's no longer fit for purpose. So it starts at the left high, and it kind of goes down. And then there's a bit of it in the future. So there's always going to be some of that horizon in the future. Horizon 3, there's already a bit of Horizon 3 now. I've already name-checked a couple of things. But that Horizon 3 gets more and more prevalent as time goes on. And then in the middle is Horizon 2. Horizon 2 is where I live. It's the disruption, it's the innovation, it's the thinking differently, it's the practicing differently, it's bursting through the ways that normally things work to come up with new ways of working. So here's some of the things that we've been told in our consultation. There's a whole load of stuff in the current horizon that are no longer sustainable. The structural and cultural hierarchies that exacerbate historical exclusions. Relationships between research and society feel extractive and transactional. Systems don't support collaborative approaches to knowledge. I've already referenced the lack of time and resource that's put in to enable this work to flourish. And funding schemes that can create power imbalances and more competition and collaboration. There's a lot more behind this. These are just a few of the headlines to get us started thinking about it. And I wonder how many of those resonate with you in your context internationally. We're a very diverse international community in the room. Do these things sound familiar to you? Are these some of the things you're experiencing in your horizon? Or perhaps there are other things that are much more important that you think are holding us back and we need to confront. And then on Horizon 3, collaborative ways of working are valued and embedded. Research culture enables deep, slow thinking and collaboration. Multiple forms of knowledge are recognized and shared. That the university no longer assumes that it has the only valid knowledge, but it recognizes the contribution it can make to a variety of knowledges that are held in different knowledge centers across different professional practices and experiences. And porous and inclusive institutions are integrated into the knowledge landscape. I dream of a knowledge landscape, I really do, where all of us can play a role, where universities are a part of that knowledge landscape, but not the only part, where we find collaboration across the cultural sector, with people who are working in different professional communities, with people who are lived experience of the challenges that we're all trying to face together, where people who have indigenous knowledges can share them and be valued and celebrated for them, but that together, and this is what I really dream of, and it's what gets me out of bed in the morning. Like, we're facing some real challenges as society. Wouldn't it be great if we brought all of our collective effort together to actually address them? So, well, I was going to ask you to do this, but I've been told I'm getting on a bit for time. But I'd like you to take this thought. What's holding you back? What's the future you imagine? And we'd love to hear more about that in the QR code, or you might want to come and tell us, and we're running a workshop later, so if you're really, really wanting to talk about the future, then do come to that, because we're going to be sharing different countries' perspectives on that. These are the tensions that sit at this. So at the heart of this way of thinking is this trying to look at different worldviews and tensions, and these tensions kind of capture some of the things that we've been talking about. So this idea that we move from exclusive organizations to ones where people feel a sense of belonging. A boundaried physical space to a reimagined space that exists in multiple forms, online and together, across continents and across countries. We're moving away from hiding mistakes to embracing failure. Let's be confident to make some mistakes. That would be kind of nice. And let's share our mistakes so we can learn from them. Let's move from institutions being validators of knowledge to being connectors and conveners of knowledge. Let's move away from short-term thinking to sustained and regenerative thinking. Paul showed a picture of a container ship, this kind of oil tanker that can't move, and there's, like these tiny, tiny movements to actually get the whole thing to move. Why not a flotilla, where we're all in different crafts, collaborating, moving between different sites of knowledge, sharing, working collectively together, and moving away from transactional, they really want me to stop, to relational ways of working. We long for a future that looks at those relational ways. And we can think about that in terms of, we'll get there eventually, different modes of knowledge.
Yeah. So where are you? Have you followed our journey? I hope so. I really hope so. And we've tried to make it simple. And I think possibly you might have been feeling with that last slide that Sophie shared, it's a bit idealistic. But we need idealism. We do need a sense of how are we going to navigate these massive systemic social forces that swirl around us. And that's why we chose Engage Future, because it's a way of stepping back and thinking about the whole system. But I think somebody asked a question on the platform about, does everybody share your passion for learning? No, they don't. But what is our business as universities? It is to do things with knowledge and to do them well. And I think we also have a kind of pragmatic and more instrumental line of argument around this work. That lovely tree of knowledge in the middle, but around it, I think where we started in 2008, the dominant paradigm of knowledge and knowledge work was what you could call mode one from the sociology of knowledge. It was about the academic production of excellent, disciplinary, often focused, deep investigation of the world. Brilliant, and we love it and we want it and it is not going away. But I think what's happened over the last 18 years is a shift in the different ways in which we value other ways of producing knowledge well. So mode two, the more applied, impactful kind of work. Mode three, I think, was where the Manchester beacon was really landing. That sense of reflective network knowledge production, that sense that we build knowledge together by working with real respect and really curiosity about each other's sense-making. And I think mode four is perhaps where some of us in the room feel is the next really exciting kind of pull into the future, where we are really thinking more deeply about the transcultural and globally conscious kind of perspective we need to build knowledge equitably. And for us, working with people like Bud and Rajesh, who will be, Rajesh will be speaking later, they've given us enormous inspiration, really, to think about that. So that we leave you with perhaps as a framework for the rest of the conference, and a mix of idealism and pragmatism. But I hope what we've communicated is a sense of hope and optimism as well. So thank you.
We do have a few minutes for questions as well, so thank you. Although I think the question's gone in that direction.
Sit down. Would you like to sit here? Oh, you're moderate. Shall I get the other chair? Sorry, we moved the chairs.
We've moved around. So we've got many questions and many comments on here, but one of the ones we wanted to raise is, what's been the biggest blocker you've encountered in your work in driving institutional change? And is there a way that the PCST community can work together to help break through this blockage?
Gosh, that's such a big question. I think there's a real fear. There's a fear of letting go of what you know to embrace something new and exciting and different. There's a fear of letting go of the things that have given you recognition and confidence and embracing a different way of knowing and doing. And I think that fear finds its way in many places. It finds itself in university managers who are trying to balance resource and staffing, and it finds itself in leaders who are trying to navigate quite uncertain financial times, and it finds itself in individuals who want to belong, and this sense of belonging being dictated by the normal ways of doing things. But I do think that against that fear is hope that there are many in this room who, like us, have been championing change, and there are many, many more outside of this room who see that things need to change for us to address societal challenges like climate crisis that we face. And so I'm optimistic that despite that fear, we can build confidence that working differently will lead to the outcome that we all care about.
So interesting, isn't it? Just reflecting on that conference theme of tradition, which is it's so important to who we are and feeling safe and connected, but also those traditions can really hold us back as well. So how you navigate that, I think for Sophie and I coming into higher education from other sectors, I suppose what we had learned, perhaps sometimes very painfully, is change is just so essential in how you organize yourself in relation to the world around you. And I think that fear of change is something that universities seem to hold much tighter than other organizations we've worked with that seem to embrace change as a constant process of trying to improve.
Okay. I'm gonna there's a lot of questions, so I think you'll be interested to read these later. I'm going to ask about this one. I think this is really interesting. What Giovanna Lima from Doran, so thank you for that. What would be the one thing that you would change about academic assessment? That's quite a big question.
Well, I mean, Sophie mentioned the REF, and it is changing. You know, if you look at the journey from the REF in 2008 to 2014 to 2021 to the current debates about the next REF, the next REF is a Mode 3 REF. It is really respectful of the complexities of building knowledge and the relationships between us with each other within universities, but our relationships with the world outside. So I applaud, you know, the direction of travel that our funders are taking. I think they're pulling us into these new ways of thinking about the work that we do. And I think research assessment, as Sophie's sort of identified with the EDGE tool, the incentives within the system are massively important. As idealists, we perhaps came in thinking, you know, if we can win the kind of emotional and values-based argument, things will change. And of course that matters, but frankly, the thing that's created the biggest shift and created the most opportunity for us is the way that research policy has shifted in the UK in the last 15 years. Without that, we couldn't have achieved anything like what we've managed to.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that the direction of the travel of the REF is exciting for sure, but there's something just a bit broken. I think about the economic model that suggests that the only people who are involved in the assessment are doing it as part of their academic role. You know, we find this with peer reviewing of articles for Research for All, that where's the money in the system to involve a wider diversity of people in research assessment? How do we recognise and support people to be involved in those ways? And what would an engaged research assessment actually look like? How would that be valued and used, and how would it be resourced? And the way we're doing it at the moment just doesn't seem to enable that. You know, and even for as progressive as a journal as I like to think Research for All is, we really struggle because we peer review using a range of different expertise, including expertise found outside the academy. But it's really difficult to find the money to enable that to happen.
The next question comes from Jenny Metcalf. This one is, I'm hearing a lot about universities and the need for change, but what are specific examples of what changes are needed, have happened, and have led to positive changes to people's lives and their environments?
Oh, just a little question then.
Yeah. I mean, the answer to that is not to talk about universities, because you get seduced by the complexity and the kind of the macro scale. I think the beauty of the work we've seen again and again starts within, you know, small teams of people, perhaps within a research centre. And Sophie mentioned the Leverhulme Centre here, which is just an amazingly beautifully designed kind of Mode 3. But it's within those relationships and those connections between researchers working with great engagement professionals, working closely with partners outside, where the real vitality and energy starts. And I think it's very easy to get seduced by, oh, how do we change the university? But I think what we need to do is cultivate, you know, wonderful examples of practice. And one of the things we're doing with Engaged Futures is just to capture as many examples as possible of what Sophie called H2 activity that models that future. And endemic in those, Jenny, are wonderful examples of mutual benefit to the research. It's better, more useful, more curious, more connected, and more impactful, but also absolutely benefit to the collaborators who've been working alongside those researchers. So yeah, we're building a wonderful compilation, but you've asked exactly the right question. Don't get seduced by the idea of the university. Focus on the work that we do.
The reasons that we chose that beautiful oak tree image was because there's a project that's currently happening. It's being led by a woman called Kate Parr, but with a huge number of collaborators. And their project is how many ways are there to measure a tree? And when I think about that project, how many ways are there to measure a tree? It's a collaborative project involving primary school children. And for those of you who are up in your tree knowledge, and I suspect there might even be people working on that project in the room, but I'm just going to look. Is anybody working on this project? Because you might prefer to talk about it rather than me. No, okay. So this project, apparently, the standard way of measuring a tree, the scientific way, is its diameter at chest height. And because that's a bit like, we've all got different chest heights, right? So chest height is now 1.3 meters. Just to be clear, and that's how you measure a tree, and that's how you make comparisons between a tree. But all of you sitting there are thinking, well, there are many other ways to value a tree. So some of you might be carbon economists thinking, oh, how much carbon is locked up in that tree? There's another way of measuring it. There's a way of measuring how its sap rises, measuring the music and the beauty of the sounds that it makes. I mean, maybe you want to measure how many leaves it has, how many animals live within it, who makes this tree their home. What are the stories you tell about it? Who have you met here? Maybe this was where you met your partner. Maybe this is where they proposed to you. There are many stories to tell about trees. There are many ways to value a tree. And what I love about this program is that this particular project, it's brought all those different knowledges to bear and asked the question, how many ways are there to measure a tree? So we're going to be going to coffee soon. Maybe you might want to share some of the ways you might measure trees. But what I get excited about is that we are beginning to understand that there isn't just one way to understand things. There isn't just one way to be in the world. There's not just one knowledge system that has prevalence. And that all of these different stories and experiences and ways of understanding, when come together, can give us a much richer and deeper knowledge to understand, for example, the value of this tree in our society.
Thank you. I actually think maybe that is a really good note to maybe end this session on. I know that there are many, many questions. There is a session that Sophie, you're leading later this afternoon where people can join and continue these conversations. The questions that people have asked as well are stored, so I'll share these with Paul and Sophie because they may wish to respond to them and build them in. I know people are conscious that they're looking to get to the sessions that are running next and get set up as the rooms and spaces are all new for everybody. I'm staying in here. We're doing a session about science communication and the justice system, more about some of the practice that we do in the research centre that I'm part of. So if you're staying in here, please bear with us a minute while we move things around. Please give a big thank you to Paul and Sophie. And enjoy the sessions and the rest of the day.